Excited about that, so oh well. But today we're going to do something that you may have never done before. We're going to look at the secret part of Mark. The secret part of Mark.
Hey Lionel, call attention to the class schedule so they know.
Oh, yeah, the class schedule. Next week, okay, I want to finish Mark today. And after we finish Mark, what I'd like to do is next week I'd like to do a review of the Logos to Telos like we did at the beginning. And then there are the special classes for special students that aren't Mark classes for what, 4 weeks? The capital campaign. And then, as I understand it, we can have 2 Mark classes at the end. And I plan to do review the historicity of Mark again. And then I plan to do a translation class, the class on translations. Just because I haven't done it in a long time, I think it'd be a great time to do that. So, that's the plan. This other stuff isn't my fault. Okay? But we will be finished with Mark, which will be really cool. But this is a part of Mark that you have never studied, right? It's not in the early documents. This is not found in the earliest documents. So, when can you date it? Well, we don't find it until well into the 2nd century. So these documents, in the 1st century documents to about the hundreds, we don't find these documents until about 200 AD. We don't find this part of Mark, which is 9 and following. Ha 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 ha. Well, we're going to look at some of the words of this, and then we're going to try to evaluate it and see where we're standing and what's going on. I would suspect this was added, I'm guessing, I would say it was added to Mark probably around 100, maybe 150 or so. But if you'll remind me again, we'll hit the historical significance of this. There is a very important historical significance that I think will become obvious from the text. But to give you the words of the day, which are very important, this one, let's get my notes. I gave you notes on them, but that's an E, right? Well, it's an E, but it's an actual A sound, but I'll write it out. E, G, E. That's wrong. Oh, no, that's right. That's right. E-G-E-R-T-H. This is right. E-G-E-R-E-T-H-E. Egerio. This is Egerio, which is the word used throughout Mark to mean, this is a word used throughout all of Mark, Egerio eknekros. That's what Mark says, and that's what Jesus constantly says when it says rise from the dead. Egerio eknekros. Egerio means specifically to rouse from sleep, from a sitting position, to raise up, literally to rise up, just rise up in general. Egerio. This word is really interesting. I should make you guess. Ifano. Phano. This is the declension, but it's phano. Phano means, it's from phos, phos. It means to appear as light, or to appear in light. Now, you could try to get this word a lot. I mean, like, for example, we know in modern science, right? The only reason you see me, you're not really seeing me, right?
Seeing the reflectors.
You're seeing what is reflected off me in light that is the opposite of what I look like. So, like, a white person is really black, right? Because you're seeing what is reflected, and only what is reflected from me. I'm absorbing all the other light energy. My face is absorbing all the light energy that isn't white. So that means I absorb dark light energy, right? That's false. Well, how could the Greeks have that concept? They didn't have that concept. But phos or phoneo means to appear in light. So where would a word like that come from? Can you guess? Somebody say it. This is a mysterion word. Do you remember? Jesus said, don't hide your light under a bushel basket. I told you how that worked, right? In the ancient world, when they went to celebrate Mithras. Mithras was a big one. In the Mithrin cycle, what they did is they put a light, a candle, under a bushel basket, and they went into the cave. By the way, all the early churches were in caves, usually Mithrin worship caves. They took over the Mithrin worship cycle. So they, like I said, the Greeks thought that Christianity was a mysterion, right? So they practiced a lot of the mysterion concepts. One of the mysterion concepts was you covered the candle, right? And Jesus said, let your light shine. In the Mithrin cycle, that's what they did. He was making fun of Mithras, and as the Christians took over Mithrin worship, one of the big elements in Christianity became light. Jesus is the light of the world. Where do you think that came from? Is there anything in the Old Testament that says God or this or that is the light of the world? Go look it up. There's none. Totally not at all in Hebraic worship. Why? What was the sun viewed as in Hebraic worship? Put it this way. In Greek worship, what was the sun viewed as? A god, Helios. Actually, Abraham saw the moon as a god. That's very well documented, okay? The moon god. But Abraham gave up his old gods for Jehovah, right? Jehovah was never, ever aligned with the sun or the stars or the moon. He was considered above it. So in Hebraic worship, there is never any relation given to light. Who was light in the Holy Land in the Old Testament? Ashtoreth. Remember Ashtoreth? Like the goddess? The sexual goddess, right? Ashtoreth is, matter of fact, Aster, we still get it. Aster in Greek, star, right? Ashtoreth means bright one. So there's all kinds of negative connotations in the Old Testament era. But in Greek mysterion, guess what light is?
Mystery.
Well, yeah, it's part of the mystery, but it's the enlightenment, right? Right? We call it the enlightenment. Where does the word enlightenment come from? Because we think like Greeks. And to us, when you are enlightened, when the light bulb comes on, right? These are Greek ideas. A light bulb doesn't literally come in your head, but in a Greek worldview, the phos be with you, the phos be with you. The phos comes up in your head. That's what happened. Pheno means to appear in light. Now here's this word. Really interesting. A-N-A-S-T-A-S. Anastasis. Anastasis means to stand up in the marketplace. To stand up in the marketplace. In every other gospel, when it says that Jesus rose from the dead, it uses anastasis. Egerio is used sometimes in the other gospels, but not as much as anastasis. However, in Mark, the only word used before Mark 9:16 or 16:9 is egerio. Now we have some, what do you call it? You have tools. We have tools in language to discover some stuff. This is E-P-I-S-T-E-S-A-N. Epistasian, okay, this is apisteo. This is a declension of apisteo. Apisteo, meaning the negative participle. What's pisteo? To be convinced by a logical argument. This is convinced by logic. So apisteo means not convinced by a logical argument. I thought it was good because I get pisteo in there, I get apisteo. This is really interesting. This word is almost always translated to not believe. Mac, does it give a single word here? Apisteo? Disbelieve, unbelieving, untrustworthy, without Christian faith. Let's see. Believe not. Believe not, not believe. But it doesn't mean that at all, does it? It means not convinced by a logical argument, not to be convinced. The opposite of pisteo. Aposteo and pisteo. Pisteo means to be convinced of a logical argument. Translated in English, we translate it poorly as faith or belief. There is no faith and belief in Greek thought. There is no faith or belief in Greek thought. That's not within their context of the worldview. So, with that in mind, let's look at the secret part of Mark, the part added. Now, what? Do you know what? You guys look in your Bibles. Every Bible tells you it's added, right? It's all added. There is no one other part that is added to the Gospels that's not found in the earlier documents. Anybody know what that is?
The stoning of the woman.
The woman caught in adultery. Yeah. The woman caught in adultery is an add. Now, I think we can figure out the Mark ad much better than we can figure out the woman in adultery ad. The woman in adultery ad was probably Gnostics threw that one in. That looks like a really strong Gnostic piece, but I'm not teaching that today. But the Mark part is really obvious where it comes from. Let's look at it. So Mark ends, and I tried to make it very clear last week that Mark ends where it does because Mark is finished with his logos to telos. Mark's logos to telos is complete in his mind because the rest of the story is known to everyone. Everybody knows the rest of the story. Peter's telling them that's not the part he was trying to prove. He wasn't trying, look, if Jesus really rose from the dead, do I need to prove that he rose from the dead? If Jesus really was killed by the Roman soldiers, do I need to prove that he was killed by Roman soldiers? Not at all. What I need to prove is what does it mean? What does it mean? To Mark, what does it mean means the logos to telos was that Jesus was God, because only God can rise from the dead, right? Well, actually, did Greek gods rise from the dead? No. No god in history ever rose from the dead. I told you there's one guy, Dionysus, who was supposed to die in Greek cultural thought, but it was later on. It was like in the 500 BC or ADs. So no god ever came back from the dead. So Mark is even telling you that Jesus is what?
God of gods or super God.
Yeah, actually, he's telling you he's extra cosmos. Okay, here's the cosmos, right? Cosmos. And in the Greek worldview, where are the gods? The gods are here. In the Hebraic worldview, in our worldview, where's God? God is in the plenum of everything. You see? This is a huge question. If you ever study Greek mythology, ask your teacher, especially if they're a progressive. I'm trying to figure out a word to say. If they're a progressive teacher, ask them, who created the Greek gods? Because the Greeks couldn't even answer that question. Their big deal was, that the Titans were the first Greek gods, but guess what? The Titans were in the cosmos. And they created the Philosophia. And they also created the other gods by procreation. And then there was a big fight between the gods, and the Titans lost, and Zeus won. And as a matter of fact, there were two Titans that were part of the Greek pantheon. Does anybody know who they were? Zeus was one, and his sister. Hestia. Hestia is actually the most powerful goddess in all of Greek mythology. And the way you know that is because there's so little written about her. Remember I've told you before in history? What you find in history is you don't write down the things that are most common. Every time you wrote an alpha or omega on your hearth. Did you know that? When you started your hearth in the morning, you put an alpha on the hearth. When you shut down your hearth at night, you never ever stopped the fire. You never killed the fire. You blanked the fire so it would be able to be lit in the morning. You never ever stopped the fire. You put an omega on it. Who was the alpha and omega written to? Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. Whenever you did a libation, a libation of food or drink. A libation, usually you drip a bit of your, who was the libation always given to, if you didn't say who? It was to Hestia. Hestia was the most important goddess in the pantheon. She was a titan. She had been eaten by her father, Kronos, and he belched her back out into the world. She was the eternal virgin goddess, and very important in Greek thought. Well, I think Zeus didn't want to be eaten. The rest of the ones were eaten, and I guess they were digested. She was the only one that couldn't be digested, which is interesting. But, yeah, it's maybe not a tasty goddess. But in any case, she was the most important, and she's the one, you know, when they say Jesus, the Alpha and the Omega, the reason they use those terms, and Phos, because those were Hestia's terms. As a matter of fact, we just celebrated the festival of Hestia. We call it Easter. Easter comes from the word Vesta. Vesta comes from Hestia. We just celebrated Hestia's feast. You didn't know that, did you? In Christianity, we took it over back in the Greek era, and we made it our own. We just never changed the name to protect the guilty and the innocent. Isn't that interesting? So I hope you wrote an Alpha and Omega on your hearth. You didn't. The Greeks did, and even into the Christian period they did, because the symbols for Hestia became the symbols for Jesus. Every libation in a Christian, see, this is the trick. This is a trick. When everyone's giving a libation, the libation that's only given to Hestia is just to Hestia, right? But every libation given to Christ was in Jesus' name, right? You don't have to do it out loud. If you do it silently, that's what Paul taught. He said, don't worship their gods, right? You can eat the meat sacrificed to idols. Don't worship their gods. This is huge. This is gigantic, because this is how Christianity came into the Mysterion. And so, as Mark ends, Mark's motive to tell us is that Jesus is God. G-O-D, he's also the Son of Man, he's the Son of David, he's the Christus. He is all in all, and he is outside the cosmos. So, somebody said, I think Al said, well, where did Jesus go? You know, we say that Jesus descended into hell. That is not Mark. Mark did not say that. I think Paul wrote that he descended into hell. But where did he go? And I don't think he went for 3 days. But, you know, Mark's view is that God was dead. God was gone. At least from the cosmos for that period. And then he came back, right? In the resurrection, we saw that. And it ends. And so, okay, remember I told you about Aesop's fables? In Aesop's fable, I get a logos to telos, and you're supposed to figure it out. There is no moral to the story. Who added the morals?
Romans.
The Romans. Who do you think added the moral to Mark? The Romans. Yes, sir.
To follow your logic outside the cosmos, did the Greeks believe in a hell? And if they did, was it outside the cosmos or inside?
No, it's inside the cosmos. But matter of fact, they believed in Hades.
Right.
And Hades, when you see the words used for the Jewish use, what does Jewish use?
Gehenna.
Gehenna. Yeah, Gehenna. Gehenna is actually a place, a real place. It's the on the side of Jerusalem. Here's Jerusalem, and there's a river or a creek right here with a big George, and this is Gehenna. As a matter of fact, Gehenna is the only other place in the world we've ever found where there was a what do they call it? There's a word for it. It's where they sacrifice infants. Infant sacrifice place. What's that?
Is it a Tophet?
Yeah, Tophet. In a place of infant sacrifice. The other place it was found is in that city in Libya, the famous old Greek city. The one that the Greeks, the Romans destroyed and sold to the earth with. What was that city? Anyone remember? There was a city that the Romans just killed everyone. Killed everyone, period. It was the city that was opposed to them during the Peloponnesian Wars. They razed the city and they salted the ground. And the reason was they had a Tophet. They had a place in infant sacrifice there, and they were sacrificing infants. The only other place of infant sacrifice we've identified in archaeological history is Gehenna. This place in Jerusalem, for goodness sakes. Wow. And that is where the Hebrews call Hades, or hell. Now, the Greeks called Hades, that's where everybody went until they kind of rejiggered their theology after Christianity. We're not sure when this came out, but ever heard of the Elysium Fields? Kind of after they got mixed with the Hebraic with the Christian view specifically, they suddenly got this idea about the Elysium Fields. So, everybody at first went to Hades, and that was it. Not a nice place, dark, under the earth, in the cosmos, in the philosophia probably, actually. And so, horrible place, right? But then after Christianity came around, then they suddenly have the Elysium Fields. If you were good or you'd been in Hades for 1,000 years, you could go to the Elysium Fields. And then, after they got about the 500 AD era, when the Greeks kind of started trading with the people from the Indian area, India and the Far East, guess what they started saying? Well, you went to Hades, and then you went to the Elysian Fields, and then after a certain period of time, you were reborn. Reborn. Very interesting. Greek culture is an interesting culture. What's that?
Was it Carthage where they had the Tophet?
Yeah, I think it's Carthage. Yeah, that sounds familiar. It was where that guy came from that did march the...
I thought they killed the Carthaginians.
The Carthaginians, yeah, Carthaginians, because that was... What's his
Hannibal?
name that marched over the Alps with the...
Hannibal.
What's that?
Hannibal.
Hannibal, yeah, of Carthage, though. He was from Carthage.
Right.
Yeah.
Marched over the Alps with
Marched over the Alps and caught him by surprise, yeah. And actually, I think he won that battle, but that was the last one he won.
That's
Yeah.
why when Rome, they made sure that that would not be a threat.
Well, they fought the Carthaginians. It was the third war against the Carthaginians, called the Third Peloponnesian War. And so the first one they won pretty well. The second one they kind of hit at a standstill, and the third one the Carthaginians were still fighting them. Look, if I were the Carthaginians, I would have said, "Forget this," right? But the Carthaginians didn't, and the Romans got serious. Fool me once, fool me twice, fool me the third time. They got serious. That's when they razed Carthage. But Carthage was a pretty nasty place too. Like I said, we really identify the Tophet. So Hades in the Greek worldview kind of evolved. It evolved. In the Hebrew worldview, the view of life evolved too. Now, what do you want to say it was because of the Greeks? Remember, you have Sarx, Suke, and Pneuma. But that's not what the Hebrews believed, right? The Hebrews believed in Adam and Nephesh. Nephesh, which is approximately Suke. Because God never put his spirit, an eternal spirit, in man in the Old Testament. Never. He put Nephesh. Nephesh is the same thing he put into animals, the breath of life. That's what Nephesh means. It's translated as, yeah.
Getting back to the Mysterion.
Uh-huh.
So the early Christian church used the Mysterion places of worship because it helped the Greeks to relate. What about the early Christians in Jerusalem, the ones that were Jews? They were a sect of Judaism for a period of time, but how did they get them to adapt to the Greek Mysterion way of worshiping?
They didn't. As a matter of fact, what we find is Teen Hodos was, the big deal with Teen Hodos is that they were sacrificing in the temple. Because remember, I've told you, in the Messianic era, the only sacrifice that was required was a sacrifice for Thanksgiving. So every day, that's why they were in the temple. They weren't teaching. I know we like to read it. It's not a good translation. I did this in Acts, when we went to the Acts class. It does not say they were teaching and preaching in the temple. They were in the temple, and why are you in the temple? There's only one reason. You're sacrificing. They were sacrificing because King Hodas believed quite sincerely that, and Messianic Jews believe today, if the temple was redone, that they would be in the temple doing the Thanksgiving sacrifice every day. We do the Thanksgiving sacrifice. We did it this morning. We call it the Eucharist. That was what John Chrysostom gave us. Now, John Chrysostom, if you go through the Orthodox liturgy, you will see a beautiful imagery of the death of Christ and the killing of the sacrifice. They basically take a skewer and they take the bread, and they take the skewer and they put it into the bread. They are basically in the sacrifice. They do not believe they are redoing the sacrifice of Christ. They believe they are in imagery re-showing the sacrifice of Christ by killing, by going through the motions of killing the sacrifice. And then they eat the sacrifice. That was the imagery of the Last Supper. That's the imagery of Christianity. That we are in the Thanksgiving sacrifice when we do that. So they were doing that until the destruction. There are two destructions of Jerusalem. The first one was 70 AD was when Nero died, but he invested Jerusalem before 70 AD, and Jerusalem fell in 70 AD. That was the first revolution. The second revolution was by Bar Kokhba, and that was 125, I think, right? About 125. In 125, and by the way, the Romans didn't give them 3 chances. The Romans said, fool me once, fool me twice, that's it. And that's when they razed Jerusalem and destroyed the walls, basically destroyed the city and salted the city of Jerusalem. Maybe because they had a top fit. I know, we like to think that the Romans were bad guys, right? But the city of Jerusalem rebelled and they destroyed the city of Jerusalem. I mean, you'd think that the Jewish guys would have got the clue, right? That the legions, they were living with the legions. If you read Centurion, a legion is not something you want to mess with. Those guys are well-trained, well-armed, and dangerous. And they're good at what they do. It's kind of like...
Who was using the child sacrifice in Jerusalem?
Originally, it was the... who were the guys that opposed Samson?
Philistines.
What's that?
Philistines.
The Philistines. The Philistines are also called the Sea People. The Sea People, what they did is, they basically are the ones who originally had Carthage. They originally tried to land in Egypt, but the Egyptians saw them as illegal aliens and kicked them out because they were subversive to the societies. They brought a culture that was a child sacrificial culture, which by the way indicates what? Where are you when you are starting to sacrifice children? Do you have any idea culturally?
Pretty evolved.
Well, starvation cultures do not sacrifice children. So what you find is starvation cultures really are cautious of life, especially their children. But cultures, as they get fat, as they begin to get a lot of food and a lot of success, that's when they begin to kill their own children. You see that in the Romans and the Greeks. The Greeks really never fully got out of a starvation culture, at least generally. The Romans did. But you see them begin to abandon children, basically kill children. They never sacrificed children in Greek or Roman things, but they left them out. They left them to die. And you remember I told you they had the, what are they called? The Asclepions. Remember the Asclepions? The Asclepions are where you went if you were sick. So if your child got a cold, I guarantee you 90% of the mothers, when their child got a cold, it was like, stay inside, don't let the neighbors see you, hopefully you get well. But if a child did not recover, guess where they went? The Asclepion. And that's a type of child sacrifice because the children probably died there. The reason they began to survive is because the Christians began to take over the Asclepions and used them because nobody went there. There were sick people there. You don't go to Schlepions, and the Christians were feeding them, taking care of them. That's, by the way, throughout Paul's writings. So, and we know that historically. So, you know, like I've said before, so your child survives the Asclepion, and a Christian person walks the child back to your house. How do you think about that? Hey, would you like to join our group? Pretty powerful message. Eh?
Lionel, I know you want to finish, Mark, but I've got one more question.
Sure. Could be easy.
Because Christ reappeared to his disciples, why do we celebrate the Last Supper before he died? If it is, we're doing it in remembrance of his sacrifice. Why wasn't the Last Supper instituted after his resurrection rather than before?
Maybe, I think I mentioned this before in the other class, because he was an Essene, take it or leave it, he did Passover on the correct day. The rabbis had moved the Passover. So Christ did the Passover on the correct day according to the Torah, where the current Israel didn't. So Jesus was put to death on the Passover. He became the Passover. But it's almost a miracle in itself that the correct Passover was celebrated by Jesus a day before.
I don't think I'm expressing my question.
Okay.
Just like the Passover meal
Yeah.
is with a lamb that has been sacrificed and is dead.
Yes.
What I'm asking is, why did Christ choose to have, and what we celebrate today, as we do every time we have communion, Christ was still alive when it was instituted.
Mm-hmm.
Why was it not instituted by Christ after his resurrection when he met with his disciples?
I would say that they believe in Messianic Jews. This is what the Messianic Jews said. When you have the Passover, you basically you separate the matzah into 3 pieces. This is the piece that's shared at the table. This is a piece called the hidden matzah that's hidden around the house. The kids go find it. And this is the matzah for the Messiah. Basically, Messianic matzah for the Christus. And this is put away. Period. Not removed until the next Passover when they get rid of all the stuff in the house and they clean the house up. So this is put away where no one can find it except the Father is supposed to know where it is. That's it. When in the Passover, you have the cup. Everybody gets the cup and you keep refilling the cup. But you also have another cup, the cup for Elijah. And that cup is set aside in the table. So the Messianic Jews believe that the symbology that came out of the true Passover, when they did eat lamb, by the way, Christ had a lamb, which was probably sacrificed, who knows? The Essenes sacrificed themselves. You know, they sacrificed the lambs themselves out in the wilderness areas. They didn't use the temple. But in any case, the Messianic Jews, and I think this is a correct view, say that Jesus Christ took this matzah, the Christus matzah, and he also took the cup of Elijah and shared it with his disciples. So the imagery could not be done after his death because that wouldn't be the Passover imagery. What's amazing, the miracle, if you like, is that the actual Passover happened on Thursday by the calendar. But yet the rabbis had intentionally moved the Passover to the Shabbat, first Shabbat after the full moon, for the purpose of aligning it for the diaspora. That's why they did it, so that the days would be correct, and also so it would be on the Shabbat, on Sabbath. So it wouldn't interfere with, if you have an extra holiday, what does it do? It interferes with commerce, right? The rabbis moved it so it wouldn't interfere with commerce. Isn't that interesting? But what that allowed was it allowed Jesus to have the Passover Last Supper on Thursday and then be the Passover sacrifice on Friday. I don't know, that sounds kind of, you couldn't make it up, right? Could you make this up? I mean, could you plan this? I mean, maybe if you were, that's theological, right? Sorry. Interesting. Anyway, let's go to Mark. Mark 16:9. If you remember, I want to remind you this. The whole point of Mark is in Mark 1:15. The time has come, Jesus legoed. The kingdom of God is near. Actually, the kingdom of God is coming with the kingdom of the earth. Repent and believe the good news. That was Jesus' whole logos throughout the book of Mark. 16:9. When Jesus anastemi. Did you hear that? When Jesus anastemi. All right, already. Did you get it? Would Mark write when Jesus anastemi? No, he would have write when Jesus egerio. This was not written by Mark. Period. Easy to see. Early on the first day of the week, he pheno first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. All right, so now we can actually place. We can place when this part of the gospel was added. It had to have been written after the what? Other
Miracles were done.
Gospels.
Other Gospels.
Other Gospels. It had to be written after the other Gospels. Because Mark, probably the earliest Gospel, in some people's words, the simplest. I don't think it's the simplest Gospel. That's okay. The earliest Gospel, Mark uses egerio, right? The other Gospels use anastemi. Guess what? This means that it had to have been written after the other Gospels. So at least after about 90 AD. So 90 AD was when we think that the Gospel of John was written. John was written, we have some really early stuff from John, and John is probably not anywhere before around 90 AD, but it's probably not after that either. So about that time, 90 AD or so. So anastemi, it had to have been written afterwards. Also, pheno gives us a clue. Pheno means what? That Christianity has already been accepted as a mysterion. Now, don't get me wrong. Do not get this wrong. Christianity is not a mysterion. It just kind of looks like a mysterion. The Christians did not dilute their worship by worshiping in a mysterion sense. What they did, and Paul did this on purpose. They basically took the Christian elements of worship and introduced them in a mysterion context. And what happened? The Greeks go, oh,
I get that.
yeah, I understand that. It's kind of like going to Japan and saying, kami-sama. What does kami-sama mean in Japanese? God. If you go to Japan and you say God, what are they going to do? Huh? Huh? But if you say kami-sama, they go, oh. And by the way, the Japanese have bunches of kami. But there is only one kami-sama. Kami-sama is the God, right? So anyway, yeah.
So for a period of time, the Jewish Christians and the Greek Christians worshiped very differently.
No, I wouldn't put it that way. What I would say is, at first, remember we see this in the Acts. At first, all the Jewish Christians and the Greek Christians went to the synagogue. They went, well, in Jerusalem they go to the temple, but where they worshipped was, you didn't worship, you sacrificed in the temple. Where did you study? At the synagogue, right? You learned in the synagogue, right? That's where Paul in Acts tells them to go. They tell all the early Christians, right? Not just Paul. All of the Jerusalem Council tells the Christians to go to the synagogue. So at first, all the Greeks and all the Jews went to the synagogue until what happened? What is a seminal event that happened? Do you remember in Corinthians? In 1 Corinthians, they kicked the Greeks, they kicked the Gentiles and Teen Hodos out of the synagogues in the diaspora. That's a seminal event. So then where did they go? Can you see this? Can you see what happened? So what happened was, in a lot of the places, the Greeks got kicked out with Teen Hodos. And the Greeks and the Teen Hodos guys, well, where are we going to go? We have no synagogue. We have no books. They took our scrolls, right? There was no books. We have no scrolls. We don't have, right? And they said, where can we worship? And in some cities, in a lot of cities, the Greek followers of Tin Hodos said, well, let's go to the Asclepion. Because the Asclepians were separated in a way, and they also, Paul suggested this, and so we know, especially in 1st and 2nd Corinthians, the Corinthians big time were doing this, and Ephesians also. So, but in Thessalonica and Thessalonians, where do you think they said, let's go? There's Mithrin worship. Maybe they made a deal with the Mithrins. Hey, can we use your place of worship on Sundays? Because you're not using them on Sundays, right? Kind of like, borrowing the
church gym.
the church down the street. Yeah. Borrowing the church down the
School
street.
gyms, yeah.
No kidding. They probably began borrowing the Mithrin worship spaces because they were underground. They were in caves usually, and they were hidden from the other, people. And also Mithrins had a good reason to keep their worship kind of secret too, because at that time the Roman Empire was beginning to squish. Mithrins were very, where you're trying to get other proselytes, going out to get other proselytes. It was very, and so was Judaism at the time. And so the Romans did not allow that. That was not allowed under Roman law to proselytize. So the Mithrins had problems with that too. But can you see the Christians? They're going into the Mithrin worship, right? And so somebody gets a great idea. Well, let's have a candlelight service. Wow, we do that, right? Well, let's do it. Probably the Greek guy said, the Greek leader or Greek person in their congregation said, well, let's do a candlelight service. It's dark in here anyway. And guess what the Mithrins did? Well, what are you guys doing? Let's go check it out. And they come to the service. And they see they're doing very similar stuff to the Mysterion, except it's more, if you know Mithrin worship was a little bit, all the Greek worship was not very nice. It's kind of it's kind of different. I don't have time to describe it, but it just wasn't pleasant, okay? But you go to the Christian worship, and the Christian worship was generally, we're all equal, men and women are the same, slave-free, right? We accept you, you're Greek, we still accept you. You're Jew, we still accept you. You're Armenian, we still accept you. We don't care, right? That was their, what did they do in Mithrin worship? Well, actually, the Mysterions did accept people as, they were supposed to accept people as all equals. But what did they really do? You're an initiate. I'm sorry, you can't come to this service because you're an initiate. You're a 10th level. You can come to this and see this mystery. You're at 30th level. You can come to this service, but you can't. I'm sorry. But in Christian worship, what was it? They'd stand up. What is the mystery of faith? Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. That's the Mysterion. And guess what? They gave it to everybody. You're an initiate? Come on. You need to be baptized. But guess what? We're training you. Oh, you've been here for 10 years? Ah, cool. Here's the mystery. You already know it, right? You've been here for 30 years. You're not more special than he is. Right? Yeah. You're just not. Sorry. You're all equal, right? Look, they call themselves an ecclesia. They call themselves the Athenian democracy. Right? They were an ecclesia. By the way, Kyrios, church, comes from Kyrios, which means Lord. That's what they called Mithras. We named our churches after Mithras because the Greeks, that's what the Greeks were doing, was they were worshiping not Mithras, but in the Mithras temples. That's where it comes from. The Orthodox still say ecclesia, which makes more sense. Anyway, okay, so we have our clues. Here's 10. This is Mary Magdalene. She went and apagelo. I should have given you a better thing. Apagelo means that she told the good news. She basically gave the good news, right? She announced the good news. Those who had been with him and who were mourning, pentheo, grieve and weeping, kaleo to wail and sob. This is not Mark's style at all. You know why? They were in mourning. That's really Greek, right? But Mark is totally Greek. Do you remember Jarvis's daughter? They were out in the open grieving, right? And so these guys were grieving. They were kaleo, they're wailing and sobbing. Gives you the sense of kind of a Greek sense. which is kind of Markish, but where does that come from, right? That's total Greek. So, okay. Would the disciples have been using a Greek mourning for Jesus? No. No. Anyway. Okay. Next. 11. When they heard that Jesus was alive and that she had seen him, they aposteo. They were not convinced. All right, remember, when Jesus the last time they were convinced was when they were with him in Gethsemane, and guess what they did? They ran away. There's even a word, phageo, for it in the Greek, for running away. They ran away, and so did the women at the end of Mark. Now they are not convinced still, which is interesting. This is more of the story right from the standpoint of the later writer. Afterwards, Jesus phanero, a Mysterion term, in a different morphe, also a Mysterion term, a different morphe, shape, to two of them while they were peripato. They were treading all around in the country. By the way, peripato, we do find that word in Mark, but it's not used very often. It is a word that's used a lot by Paul. So very good chance that somebody who was familiar with Paul added this piece. 13. They returned and reported to the rest, but they did not pisteo. Literally, they did not pisteo. In the Greek worldview, to aposteo is totally the end, but to not be convinced without it, a negation and pisteo means they're getting closer. In other words, that when Mary Magdalene told them, she was a woman, and they said, we don't believe you at all, right? But then after a couple of others saw him, they were slightly more convinced. It's kind of interesting little thing here. Obviously, there's a different type of logos to telos in this whole piece. 14. Later, Jesus appeared to the 11 as they were eating. He rebuked them. He literally defamed them for their apostasia, the fact they were not convinced, and their stubborn sclerocardia, which is also not used in Mark any other place. Their hard-heartedness, their refusal to be convinced. Those who had, after they had seen him, egerio. After they'd seen him, egerio. So the writer of this basically uses anastemi right at the beginning. Why did he all of a sudden, do you think, use egerio? You find this in the other Gospels. He's being literary, right? When you write, you don't use the same words over and over again because that makes it boring for the reader. So you use the different word. This guy is obviously familiar with Paul's writing and with the other Gospels. That's why he's putting these different words in, which is kind of interesting. 15, he epoed to them. Do you remember all the other ones? They were always logos, right? But now it's not logos, it's past tense. Everything's past tense. So a different writer. He epoed to them, go into all the world, the cosmos, the creation. Literally go into all the cosmos. And keruso, be a town crier, the euangelion, the good news from the gods, to all catesis. Catesis, we do find this word, catesis, in Mark. Catesis means the creation of the cosmos. So a really cool word. Anyway, 16. Whoever pisteo is convinced and is immersed will be suzo. But whoever aposteo is not convinced will be katakrino, will be condemned and judged against, literally in the Greek. What's interesting is this is the first time we've ever heard about baptism. Yeah. There's, baptism is a new idea. Did Jesus ever say about baptism or getting baptized in Mark? It was part of the rest of the story. We know it's the rest of the story, but this isn't Mark writing this. This is obviously an ad. 17. Look at these signs. I love this. And these simeon, these miraculous signs, will parakoletheo. They will go along with, near be with, literally, follow near, those who pisteo. In my onome, my name, they will ekbalo demons, literally deities. They will lay low in fresh tongues, glossolalia. By the way, this isn't speaking in tongues. The word glossolalia, remember I told you, there are two words for unknown tongues, omphag, and kaleo. These are both words that mean speaking in tongues, gibberish. One of them is the word of the gods, and the other one is considered the word of the mystery. If you went to the belly button of the world, if you went to Olympia, Delphi. If you went to Delphi and you wanted to get a seance, a saying, an oracle from the prophetess, the prophetess will give you a kaleo. She will speak in an unknown language, completely unknown, and then it will be interpreted later. Usually she interpreted until the Athenians took over, and then the Athenians interpreted. And by the way, her oracles went downhill after the Athenians began interpreting, but that's okay. And the Athenians always interpreted in their thing. They would say, well, she just said that the Spartans should give us 1,000 talents of gold. And the Spartans go, what, how did you get that? Well, because I'm the priest, I could do that, right? So it worked pretty well for the Athenians. But before that, she might go off the, she'd always go off the reservation and maybe say something like, well, the Athenian fleet will be destroyed by Xerxes. And it was. Oh well, sorry. Anyway, the Omphi were the words of God, and they were in every statue to the gods, God's statue, they found megaphones in their mouths. And the priests would stand behind and talk. So there are words. So the word glossolalia does not mean unknown tongues. Okay? It means tongues that are known by human beings, and that is a total mistranslation that has created the charismatic movement, which is kind of sad and funny, but that's all right. They will speak, the charismatic did exist, but they were mostly drug-induced. And by the way, that's what Paul warns against, because part of mysterion worship in the Greeks was this frenzy, a frenzy. Where you get into a frenzy, a mental frenzy, and you would begin to babble. It was a mental kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, we can talk about that at some other point. Maybe we do Hebrews. In any case, these are the signs, the miracle sign. And by the way, Simeon, this word is not used in Mark, so Simeon until here, that's a word used in John. John talks about the Simeon. And look what they say, this is interesting. They will pick up, in this 18, they will pick up Ariel, lift up snakes, Ophius, with their hands. That hands is added. They will pick up snakes, and they will imbibe deadly thanatheos, fatal poison, and it will not hurt them at all. And they will place their hands on the sick, ariestos, literally not strong people, and they will get kleos, morally well. Now, okay, who picked up the snake? Paul, when?
When they shipwrecked Malta.
Yeah, they're shipwrecked in Malta. So this does not say that this does not say that everyone should pick up snakes and not get bitten. What this is a proof text. The proof text is what? Paul picked up a snake and it bit him and he survived. The point is not that you should go and pick up snakes and you'll be okay, but rather it's a historical proof text. This means that this had to be written after what? After it happened to Paul. And it goes on further. Who imbibed deadly poison? You should know this. It should have been part of your history in the church. John the Apostle, in other ancient literature, when he met Dionysian, the emperor Dionysian, when he met the emperor Dionysian, according to other documents in the past, he was forced to drink poison and survive. And because he survived, according to this text, Dionysian did not accept Christianity, but began to allow the Christians more freedom, especially to proselytize. So this was a very important and key event in the early church that we know about. So this had to have been written after John had met Dionysian, and especially probably after John's gospel. This was probably late, so like I said, about 150 AD. This is a direct allusion to Paul and a direct allusion to John. This doesn't say you should drink poison. This doesn't say you should pick up snakes. That is a total misinterpretation, or mistranslation of what it says. It's talking about things that actually happened in the past that were occurring. The extra part about, healing comes because they are in Asclepions, right? And they're healing people. They're not healing them. It doesn't say they'll heal them. It says they will make them get stronger. In other words, by feeding them, look, you got a kid who's got a cold. What do? Give him a blanket and feed him and wipe his nose, right? That's what they were doing. So whether you want to take a miraculous context from this or just a normative context, that they were actually treating people who needed help. In 19, after the Lord, the Kyrios, church, Kyrios, Lord Mithros, got it? Jesus is added, so just Kyrios, had lelo to them. Usually he legoed, right? He's leloing to them. He was anabalo, taken up into heaven, and he sat on the right hand of God. So there we go. Now, that is Psalms 110, 1 through 7. I won't read unless I have time, so I'm going to go to 20. Then the disciples went out and caroused, they heralded everywhere, and the Lord worked with them and confirmed his word by the signs that accompanied it. In other words, somebody added what to Mark?
Summary.
A Roman moral. Yeah, summary. A Roman moral that summarizes.
Happily ever after.
They lived happily ever after. And actually, there's nothing wrong with it. What it was, see, when we used to teach kids about Aesop's fables and teach it properly, we would teach them what? We would teach them in Greek, and then they'd read the Greek and they'd say, where's the moral? Because when I was a kid in nursery school, when I was like 6 years old reading this, because kids read at 6 in the not so past, right, 5 and 6, when they read it, they'd say, when I read this in English in my nursery school, it always had, or my nursery, not nursery school, my governess, right, taught me to read, or my mother did, and I read it, there was a moral. And so when they read it in the Greek, they'd say, where's the moral? And guess what their teacher would say? Next year we study Latin. Here's the Latin. Guess what? The Aesop's Fable in Latin has the morals added. Likewise, when they used to teach Mark, they would teach you in Greek, and then at the end, the teacher would say, and guess what? What does this look like to you? And the kids who knew the Greek would say, this doesn't look like the style or words or vocabulary or anything that Mark used before. And also they knew about Dionysian, they knew about John, they knew about Paul because they'd read the rest, right? They knew about it all. And they would say, well, teacher, this looks like an Aesop's Fable where someone added a moral to it. And the teacher would go, very good. In our modern era where we don't learn Greek, we don't learn Latin, we don't even know what an Aesop's Fable, half the kids probably don't know what Aesop's is and don't know that an ash, A-E, right, is a letter, right? Most of the kids can't read, write, or figure today. They don't, it's not Greek, they know English. So we have a serious problem, and guess what? In our education, I didn't learn Greek, I wish I did. I didn't learn Latin, I wish I did. If you know these things, these are obvious, right? And so, as we look at Mark, I don't think it's, and what you need to do as Christian people, you will meet teachers, you will meet atheists, you will meet people that will say to you, well, Mark has added parts. And guess what you can say to them? You're right, it does have added parts, and here's why, right? And you can understand and answer their questions, because otherwise if you say what? No, there isn't, what will they do?
Yeah, they know you.
You're an idiot, because you are an idiot if you don't know that, right? This is basic to the Greek of Mark. And so, as Christians, this is the power we have in education. I guess we're over the time. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look at us this week. In your name we pray, amen.
We didn't ring the little bell.